So with that, I would love to extend the floor so we could talk to Bianca. So we're going to bring Bianca Gonzalez on, and I'll give you a bit of information about Bianca Gonzalez. Bianca is a writer, researcher, and social advocate. She uses her skill set and life experience to produce B2B content that resonates with any audience by supporting the causes they care about. As a gay, disabled Puerto Rican brain cancer survivor, she views consumers through an intersectional lens. And I love this on your website, Bianca. You say brands don't need to pick a side in order to advocate for social change. Definitely. And you started B2B inclusive, as a way to support brands with strong corporate values. And consumers are growing increasingly aware of the social impact that their dollars has. And Bianca wants to help unite socially responsible consumers with brands they can feel good about supporting. I love that from your website, Bianca, and thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I mean, I love those commercials. They were pretty great. I wasn't expecting I never really know anymore what to expect with commercials. It could really go any way, especially when you're trying to have representation. But I found that they really embodied what it means to kind of overcome an accessibility issue
Yeah.
and how technology and different things that we do can kind of play up to that. So I really appreciated that.
Yeah, I love those. Shout out also to Ahmad, who brought Ahmad Barber, our chief creative officer and managing partner, who added a few of those in. And so we definitely have more. I wish we had more time. We would have looked at a few more. But I want to talk more about the work that you're doing. Could you tell us a bit more about yourself and your work?
So I am a queer Latina brain cancer survivor, and so I experienced brain cancer at 19 in the middle of my college experience, and I was always Puerto Rican and I was always a woman, right? And so I kind of knew that world. But I went from being not disabled to suddenly being disabled, and it was my first experience kind of coming into this world that I had known nothing about. I was probably very ableist in how I went about my life before I became sick and experienced all of that and needed to have accessibility. Um, and so that really inspired me to kind of encourage people to have conversations about it, because if it took me having to go through a disability and having to need accessibility when I didn't before to understand that people are entitled to that and that the amount of good that I can contribute and other people can contribute to the world is greater than the access issues that we may have. Once I realized that, that's really what I wanted to kind of spread and share with people
Well, thank you for
and
your
businesses.
I love that. Thank you for your perspective. And I definitely could see, I could imagine the shift, right? And you talked about, even being aware of certain possible ableist measures or, attitudes that you had before. And I think that definitely segues into some of the articles that you wrote about, the necessity for disability inclusion. Particularly, you have one that says, if your workplace isn't accessible, it can't be inclusive. You wrote that companies who have prioritized accessibility usually lacked understanding in its potential benefits, the scope available to talent, and the cost versus the return on investment of disability inclusion. No, that was from a survey study that you were analyzing. And you mentioned that workplaces are missing out on the benefits of inclusivity when they fail to make things accessible to everyone. So could you take us through some of the benefits of having a truly inclusive workplace?
I think that some of the biggest benefits are with the things that your colleagues and your employees will feel comfortable sharing. They're going to be able to be more involved and engaged in projects if they feel comfortable voicing their limitations. It's going to foster an environment where you can ask more questions and you can come in with concerns. And when you have that environment as a foundation of your working place, you can increase diversity of thought, you're going to increase collaboration and overall just satisfaction among your employees, because ultimately even if you're not disabled, you will still benefit from having a mindset surrounding accessibility where you yourself are allowed to speak up and ask for things. Plenty of people might have trouble seeing a screen or have some level of like light sensitivity or vision impairment to the point where they might need to sit at the front of the presentation seat to see the screen if we're in an office, and to create an environment where that person can feel comfortable speaking up for themselves and asking for that kind of accommodation. It just fosters an environment for everyone else too. Those are smaller kind of sacrifices that we can make for each other in the workplace to kind of help everyone feel comfortable contributing more.
Absolutely. I think definitely think those are awesome suggestions. Now, when we think about some benefits, of course, I want to talk about what companies are getting wrong right now when we think about um, building truly inclusive environments for people living with disabilities. What are some of the, let's say, top 3 or 4 things that you're seeing or that you witness just overall in your work? So
I think a lot of people, without really even looking into things, they might say that the cost is overwhelming, that it's too much work to go and try to make things accessible, um, that it's not feasible or realistic. And there might be certain steps that you could take that would be costly or expensive, but not everything needs to be that way. There are certain, like accessibility on like a website is pretty much built into any website that you can make that happen and you need to. And that would change who applies for jobs, like you said in your presentation. And it will also change how people outside of your company perceive what your company is about.
and what we're finding is just people either don't know or, to your point, are too lazy to make a change. I've made too lazy in certain ways. I think that
Yeah,
via resources are
I
ignorant.
think I think it's also an insecurity. Like,
Mm,
you don't want to look into disability rights and then realize you yourself have flaws and faults and that you yourself have limitations. A lot
yeah,
of people might mask or avoid identifying as disabled themselves, because they just have a lot of shame with needing to ask for help. And so they might be able to, in their circumstance, tough it out for however long, but not everyone is. And it's not necessarily good for that person or anyone else to do that, anyways.
that's a really big point there. I think a part of it, a part of that self journey is holding some people back as well, right? Like if you're a leader and you're on that self journey, yourself, and you have people living with disabilities in your company, you can just imagine the things that they don't have, accessibility, solutions they don't have because of someone's self fear. That's a big thing. I haven't even thought about that. That's so
I
true.
mean, for years, when I first was sick, I didn't identify as disabled because I was still in school. I had a 3.8, I had a degree. I felt like if my mind had really gone through something,
Mhm.
that it would in some way interfere with my ability to get an education. But it turns out you can have accessibility issues and still accomplish things.
Yes,
So,
absolutely. Yes, that's a big point, Bianca. As Oprah would say, aha, for sure. In your article, The Immediate Need for Disability Representation, you focus much of your analysis on the advertising industry, including pointing out what we mentioned before, that only 2.2% of ads in 2019 featured disabled people. You also wrote, objectification can no longer be an acceptable standard. For disability inclusion. Objectification is described as the act of treating someone as though they're an object to be used by another person. The objectified person is merely seen as an instrument or a mere means to an end, rather than be seen as an independent subject with thoughts, feelings, aspirations, and contributions. People with disabilities are often objectified and infantilized, even in efforts that appear inclusive. And so that entire, series, sentences, paragraph there, I wanted to read out because it really summed up some of the dangers that we're seeing in trying to represent people living with disabilities more authentically. So could you expound more on avoiding objectification and then how people can authentically connect with people living with disabilities?
so I think that focus group is a good place to start. Maybe that first commercial where they're just showing disabled people just to see how people kind of perceive it. And it's just like disabled people that are visibly disabled for the sake of being there. It was off putting to people and they felt like, oh, they're kind of thrown in, and like, are they just doing it to look a certain way? And then all of a sudden, when even though they were being ableist in some of their comments, and all of a sudden when the disabled person was like, hi, I'm speaking to you now, it suddenly it became like real to them that, oh, like, this is a real person, they're not a prop. And so those commercials kind of did a kind of a good job of showing how objectification is kind of you sitting there kind of being this being that is meant to be kind of perceived by the ableist community or the able-bodied community as a whole, rather than everyone as a whole, or you being seen for who you are, instead of kind of having a voice as a disabled person and saying, hi, I am this person, I have these disabilities and such, but I also have things that I like to do, like laundry and
Yeah,
eat cereal. Like, there are things that I do that just make me a normal person.
absolutely. And I think that's part of a large part of, even the lack of representation within advertising, right? So
Mm-hmm.
when you think about this from a race and ethnicity, and many people say, well, we don't want to get things wrong, or we don't want to, find the wrong people, or they're not out there. When the truth is really summed up to that self-reflection part, right? Like, are you doing the work? Are you scared to go into a community to really assess yourself and your connection to bias that may be there? And I think that that's something that, just generally within this diversity and inclusion conversation, that's come up, right? People
Yeah.
being interested in doing the work, people being interested in connecting with, people living with disabilities, Black people, the intersections of all of those identities and more, right? Latinx individuals and more.
Yeah, absolutely.
I, I'm just thinking about that, making that connection is just, as we said before in this presentation, all identities are intersecting, but this just doubles down on that in much a realistic way, just us talking about it. I want to talk about a few solutions. What are a few solutions or resources you could provide or recommend to those who are looking to build more inclusive workplaces?
I would say that one of the first places you could really start, and that would make sense to start for a lot of workplaces, would be to reach out to the people with or without disabilities in your office who are currently there. Just because you might not have any disabled people in your office does not mean that there are no accessibility issues that are interfering with just the people who are already there. And so getting a frame of reference for what you're doing wrong, because you're going to be doing some things wrong if you're reaching out kind of the first or second time about these things and beginning to foster that environment. When you find out that you're doing something wrong, it can give you context to see what kind of things and practices your office has, your workspace has, that is creating an interference for people who might have particular needs, whatever they may be. And that can be a frame of reference to get feedback and to get stronger and to kind of create a space where you can say you're allowed to voice that you have issues with your accessibility. And we want you to feel comfortable doing that because we want to make the best space we possibly can.
And I love this. And, because we're at the intersection of workplace and marketing, we always mention you can't have inclusive marketing if you don't have an inclusive team, right?
Yes.
So going into the solutions, I'm sure for marketing, they may be the same, but I'll ask this, what are the solutions to ensuring that we're authentically connecting to people living with disabilities who are, of course, consumers, right? How can we
Mhm.
ensure that marketers are authentically connected with?
I think one of the best things you can do, of course, get people on your team, really fight to get voices on your teams or just perspectives from different people who are coming in just to help you out. Like, take that, but also highlight disabled voices. Like, we saw that with the deaf family for the Amazon commercial, and we saw that for the Apple commercial, which showed a bunch of different disabilities and all the different ways that people are trying to get around that and do all sorts of crazy things. Like, I loved it. I mean, the taking the photo was a moment for me. Oh my god,
Yeah,
for the visually
and then
impaired person. But
rewinding, because I thought something was wrong with the video at first when
yeah,
like started rewinding, and then they brought in the person living with disabilities who's creating this
she's like,
commercial.
I did this.
I
Yeah.
did. I was like, Apple A+ on that. It's because I think that's one thing that we really don't see. We don't look at like how these how assistive devices or how the sausage is made, for lack of better terms, right? How
And
we,
you had forgotten. You
yeah,
forgot all about her.
yep,
And you were just in love with what she had made. And
yeah,
then you found out that she was the one who made it. And that was the way of challenging kind of how we would perceive what she's probably able to do based off of the fact that she's in a wheelchair. She can't move her arms. How can she type? Things
yeah.
like that.
And it's like getting it done as we normally tend to do, getting it done, right? And I love that. Um, and to that point, the copy itself, right, brought everything together. So
Yes.
many times within the marketing, we focus on the visuals, but I think the copy itself through and through was talking about, we can do this, this is normal, this is something we're pushing the envelope, right, and just doing and living our lives really, and making these amazing commercials like myself. And I think that the copy was as strong as the visual in that case. So shout out to Apple. I know that there are quite, some critiques to Apple, but what we can say is that Apple is one of those brands who are more consistent, within their push for multiculturalism in many different ways, right?
And it definitely any kind of accessibility you're creating in your workspace and any accessibility and inclusion you're creating in marketing, both of those things are going to feed each other.
Yeah,
Why would I, as a disabled person, want to go somewhere where I can see that someone's clearly not accessible? Why
yeah,
would I want to work for that person if I see that their marketing is so bad around disability? If I see that their marketing is amazing and I see that they're highlighting their disabled employees in commercials, I'm going to feel more confident as a worker with a strong skill set to go and apply for that job and contribute to that team.
absolutely. Bianca, this was an amazing conversation. Thank you again for being available for us and your great insights. I'd love to just open the floor to provide you any time to talk about any, solutions or things that we didn't talk about within our conversation, if you have any.
I mean, I think at the end of the day, it is scary, being whatever you are, white, black, brown, man, woman, in a world where you want to make sure that you're doing all the right things and there's 1,000 right things to do and 1,000 wrong things to do. But at the end of the day, we are all people and we're getting through it. And so we're all going to make our mistakes and our hiccups. So we can acknowledge that, kind of make sense of it together, and just keep pushing forward and making positive progress, I think.
That's amazing. Bianca, let everyone know where they can find you and your work.
You can go to my website, b2binclusive.com, and I am on Twitter at Our Stellar Words. And yeah, that's pretty
Yes,
much my
and check out
socials.
Bianca's amazing writings on Culture Hub as well. Um,
Yes.
Sign up to Culture Hub at boldculturehub.com. And again, thank you all for joining us. Thank you for joining us on demand if you're looking at this recording. And if you need anything from Bold Culture, from workshops to audit services to see how accessible your workplace or marketing messages are, feel free to join us at boldculture.co, boldculture.co. Thanks again, everyone. Take care. And thank you, Bianca, for sure. Thank you.